adjust that dial. That's right, this grid is your friend, and this video is all about how to use your ruler to get a good, accurate cut, whether you want to or not. The ruler is your friend because it's going to keep your hand safe and will provide for you some beautiful accuracy, which will help you with your patchwork, whether you strive for perfect points or not. Let's bounce overhead so you can see a nice piece of fabric here. And what you're going to first want to think about is no piece of fabric you can trust to be perfectly square. So you always want to true and square your fabric to begin with. And before I even dive into that conversation, the first thing I want to really say is look at my mat. You'll notice on my mat there are no numbers, and that's intentional. I always want to use the numbers on my ruler. I want to use the numbers on my ruler because it helps me see what I'm doing and it gives me a very straight cut. One of the things that happens to a lot of us is we start to mix our tools up in the middle of a project, such as our sewing machines or our rulers, or we look at the lines on our mat and we look at the lines on our ruler while we're cutting, and therefore we're not being as accurate as we could be. Best thing to do is get all your cutting done once with the same ruler, the same cutter, the same mat, get all your chores done so that you can enjoy the patchwork process. So back to overhead. We need to come and assume this is coming straight from the quilt shop. So no edge is ever perfect until I've cut it myself. And so what I'm going to first do is I'm going to find a line down here along the edge of my fabric, but also on the edge of my ruler. And I'm going to create a nice square line. And once this line is square, I know that's going to be my true. So I will rotate this around here. And let's say I need to make a 2.5 inch cut. Well, this ruler, I can come across, here's 1, 2.5. And what I want to start looking for is I want to look at the crosshairs, actually where the threads and the crosshairs on the ruler and everything line up. I want to be able to see that, and believe it or not, some rulers have a really thick line, and that thickness of that line can throw off your cut at an angle that can be not so good for us if we are shooting for accuracy. So another thing I'm going to point out, because we're talking about rulers though, is this ruler also happens to have a 1/2 inch side. So you want to know your tool, know what you're working with. This 1/2 inch side allows me, when I'm cutting my 2.5s, which I do for my bindings all the time, is now I can look here at one of my straight lines. I now see my crosshairs a little bit better, and now I can go ahead and I can cut. Now the other thing I want to point out is I love to cut it with my blade of my cutter against the ruler, but not way back at the beginning. I want to start in the field, so I've got a nice run as I cut along through here. What I don't want to do is I don't want to start at this tip, because anytime I start down at that tip, I'm going to nick my blade and I'm going to tear up the ruler itself, and that's going to start to affect negatively the accuracy down the road. So while I'm cutting, I always want to make sure, if at all possible, I'm starting at least 1 inch down on my ruler. Now, another thing I want to talk about is some of my hand placement. What I want to do is I want to keep my hands wide. I want to keep them up. I don't want to keep my hands along the edge where if ever I had a problem and my cutter jumps up onto my ruler where I could be in trouble. So I really want to practice good hand management as well. And these longer rulers have a real tendency to drift at the top. So a lot of us, because of our comfort of our body, we cut in here close. And as I begin to cut and I press, I'm going to cause this to drift over here. So one of my lessons is I will go ahead when I'm cutting, and if I'm cutting a really long cut, I will go ahead and cut through here like this, and then I'll move my hand up, and now I'm applying pressure up here. Oh, see, I told you this is going to be getting a little dangerous. Move my hand up here, a little less pressure, low, a little more pressure up high, and now the end of this ruler is not going to drift as much. So having a ruler that fits nicely is really important. Another thing a lot of us want to do, because we want to work quickly, is we want to take lots of pieces of fabric at once and we want to cut them. And you certainly may do that. 4 to 6 layers is a great idea. Some of us though will have a long piece of fabric and we want to fold it. If you're going to fold your fabric, please fold your fabrics single layer, folded, and then your next piece of fabric would be folded again on top of that. And then I would line these lines up. But I gotta tell you, I can guarantee those aren't gonna be perfect. So then I'm gonna come in here, I'm going to use a fold now along that upper line so I can see what I'm doing. Now I'm going to trim these to true them. And then I would rotate, because I'm right-handed, to make sure that I'm now cutting off of that right hand, so that if I wanted 2.5-inch strips of these pieces, I could go ahead and do that. So I will cut as many as, let's say, 6 layers folded at a time. So that's going to be actually 12 full layers of fabric. That's an awful lot. And having a sharp blade on your cutter will make that really important. And hey, that just gave me an idea. I need to do a cool video on how to just change your blades. I did a cool video on the different blade sizes and why. Got to come back with a follow-up, how to change those blades. The cool thing about my job is every time something comes out of my mouth or my hands, I realize we can do something more, and we can do something else to make it fun.